Kept my mouth shut the day my son brought her home for the first time. That was 3 years before the wedding. He walked through the front door of my house, the house his mother and I bought in 1987, the one with the cracked driveway I keep meaning to fix. And he said, "Dad, this is Serena." She smiled at me the way people smile at someone they've already decided doesn't matter. Polite. Practiced. Eyes doing a slow sweep of the living room before they came back to my face. I shook her hand and said it was nice to meet her. I did not mention the storage units. I want to explain what I mean by that, because people hear storage units and they picture a few padlocked garages somewhere off the highway. That's not what I built. My name is Owen. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years, most of my adult life, all of my best energy, building Callaway self-storage from a single 12-unit facility on the edge of Dayton, Ohio, into a business with 4 locations, 218 rentable units, and a management contract with a commercial property group out of Columbus. My wife Diane helped me name it. She said we should use her maiden name because mine, Pruitt, sounded like something you'd name a law firm. She was right about most things. She passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through all of it, and I have not been the same since, but I don't say that out loud very often. After she died, my son Cody moved back to Dayton for about 8 months. I appreciated that. We watched football on Sundays and he helped me clean out her closet, which I could not have done alone. Then he met Serena at a work conference in Indianapolis, and 6 months after that he told me he was moving there to be closer to her. I told him I understood. I did understand. I just didn't like it. The engagement happened fast. 14 months after they started dating, he called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "Dad?" I asked her. She said yes. I told him congratulations. I meant it. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon after I hung up, and I sat in the kitchen for a while, thinking about Diane, thinking about how she would have handled all of this better than me. The wedding was in September. Small ceremony at a venue outside Indianapolis. Serena's family was large and loud in the good way, her mother crying from the first hymn, her uncles laughing too hard at the rehearsal dinner. I sat at the head family table, and I smiled and I made small talk, and when people asked me what I did for a living, I told them I was semi-retired, which was technically true. I had a manager named Phil running day-to-day operations. I still owned everything. I just let Phil handle the calls. I did not correct anyone when they assumed I was just a retired guy on a fixed income. I don't know exactly when I decided to do that. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was more like an instinct. I followed without fully examining it. There was something in the way Serena looked at my house when Cody first brought her to visit, something in the way her eyes moved that made me feel like information in her hands would become ammunition. So I kept it. The first sign came about 6 weeks after the wedding. Cody called on a Saturday morning. That was normal. We usually talked on weekends. But this time, he started the conversation in a way he never had before. He said, "Dad, Serena and I have been talking." He paused after that, the way people pause when they're hoping you'll fill the silence so they don't have to say the hard part themselves. I didn't fill it. Then waited. He said Serena thought it might be a good idea for me to think about consolidating. That was the word he used, consolidating. He said she'd mentioned that a lot of people my age found it easier to simplify their financial situation, maybe move some assets into a structure that the family could help manage. He said it like he was reading from something. I said, "Is that right?" He said, "She's just thinking about your future, Dad." I said, "I appreciate that. I'll give it some thought." I gave it no thought. I knew exactly what that conversation was. Diane used to say that when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. Serena had told me who she was that first night in my living room. I believed her then. I believed her now. 2 weeks after that phone call, Serena called me herself. This surprised me. In the 3 years I'd known her, she had never called me directly. Texts occasionally, always brief, always bounced through Cody first. But this was a direct call, a Sunday afternoon, and she opened with small talk about the weather and asked how I was sleeping, which struck me as an odd thing to ask. Then she said she and Cody had been doing some research into estate planning. She said it casually, the way you'd mention you'd been looking at new dishwashers. She said she knew I'd worked hard my whole life, and she just wanted to make sure everything was protected. I asked her what she meant by protected. She said, well, if something were to happen to you, God forbid, it would just be so much easier if things were already organized. For Cody's sake, I said. That's very thoughtful of you, Serena. She said, we were thinking maybe a family trust, or even just a simple transfer of ownership while you're still healthy and can make those decisions clearly. There it was. I told her I already had an estate plan in place, which was true. I told her my attorney handled all of that, which was also true. I told her I would bring it up at my next appointment, which I said to end the conversation. After I hung up, I called Phil and told him to make sure all the facility records were filed correctly and that nothing, not a lease, not a P&L, not a property tax document, was accessible from any shared account or family portal. Phil said sure thing, without asking why, because Phil has worked with me for 11 years, and he knows when not to ask. Then I called my attorney, a man named Gerald, who I've known since the 90s. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I like about Gerald. Then he said, Owen, we should update your LLC structure. I said I was thinking the same thing. The escalation happened gradually, and then, all at once, for about 2 months after the phone call with Serena, things went quiet. Cody and I talked on weekends like normal. He didn't mention storage units or trusts or consolidation. I started to wonder if maybe I had misread the situation. I am 64, not 30, and I am aware that I sometimes expect the worst because the worst has happened to me enough times that it starts to feel like the baseline. Then in January, Cody came to visit for a long weekend. He came alone, which was unusual. He said Serena had a work thing. We had a good first day. Went to a diner we used to go to when he was in high school, drove past the first storage facility I ever built, which is now a mattress store. He laughed about that. I laughed too. On the second day, he sat down at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. He had written things on it. I could see numbers. He said, Dad, I want to talk to you seriously about the business. I poured us both coffee, and I sat down. He said he'd been doing research. He said the self-storage market in Ohio was strong, and that based on what he could estimate, he used the word estimate, the business might be worth somewhere between $2 and $3 million. He said it like he was doing me a favor by knowing that. He said Serena had a contact at a commercial real estate brokerage who could do a proper valuation. I looked at him across the table. My son, he had his mother's eyes, but my stubbornness, which I had always considered a good thing until that moment. I said, What are you proposing, Cody? He said, We're not proposing anything. We just think it might be time to think about whether holding on to all of this is really what's best for you. You're 64. You've worked your whole life. You could sell, take the money, and actually enjoy. I said, I enjoy it now. He stopped. I said, I enjoy running my business. I built it for 31 years. Your mother was part of building it. I'm not interested in selling it. He set down the legal pad. He looked at it instead of me for a moment. Then he said, Serena thinks, I said. I know what Serena thinks. That was the end of that conversation. He left the next morning. We didn't hug at the door, which had never happened before. I stood in the driveway and watched his rental car back out, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, something colder than anger. After he left, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Gerald. I told him I needed the LLC restructuring done as soon as possible. He said he'd have documents ready within the week. The second was to Phil. I told him we were changing the business name on 2 of the 4 locations, not permanently, just the registered trade name used for public-facing documents, and that I needed updated certificates of operation in the new name. This was not illegal. Businesses do it all the time. Phil said he'd take care of it. The third call was to my brother Lawrence, who lives in Columbus, and who has never once in his life given me bad advice. I told him everything. He listened. When I was finished, he said, You know what you're doing. I said, I know what I'm doing. He said, you need anything, you call me. I thanked him and we hung up. I went out to the garage after that and worked on the riding mower for an hour. I find that mechanical work clears my head in a way that nothing else does. Diane used to say I went to the garage the way other men went to a bar. She wasn't wrong. I want to tell you about the letter because it was the moment I understood how serious they were. 6 weeks after Cody's visit, I received a piece of mail at my home address. It was from a law firm in Indianapolis, not Gerald's firm, a different one. The letter was addressed to me personally. It referenced my self-storage business by name. It said that my son, as my intended heir and nearest living relative, had authorized them to conduct a preliminary inquiry into the business valuation and ownership structure in anticipation of future estate planning proceedings. I read it twice, then I scanned it and emailed it to Gerald with the subject line, "Call me." Gerald called me within the hour. He said the letter had no legal authority whatsoever. An attorney can't compel anything based on a family member's request alone, not without a court order, not without medical documentation establishing incapacity. He said it was a pressure tactic. He said some law firms sent these letters on spec, knowing that older people who received official-looking correspondence sometimes responded out of confusion or fear. I was not confused. I was not afraid. I was, for the first time in a long while, completely focused. Gerald said, "Would you like me to respond?" I said, "Not yet. Let's wait and see what they do next." What they did next was send Serena. It was a Saturday in March. I was at the second facility on the east side of Dayton, doing a quarterly walkthrough with Phil, when my phone rang. It was Cody. He said he and Serena were in town, and they wanted to stop by and see me. He said it lightly, like it was spontaneous. I knew it wasn't. I finished the walkthrough. I drove home. I tracheomed Gerald on the way and told him what was happening. He said, "You don't have to let them in." I said I knew that. I said I was going to let them in anyway. They arrived about 40 minutes after I got home. Serena was dressed professionally, which struck me. It was a Saturday. She was supposedly visiting her father-in-law, but she had on a blazer and she carried a leather portfolio. She hugged me at the door. The hug lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and no longer. We sat in the living room. She brought pastries from a bakery downtown, the kind Diane used to like. I noticed that. I wondered if Cody had told her, or if it was a coincidence. Either way, it sat wrong with me. Serena did most of the talking. Cody sat beside her and occasionally nodded. She had printed materials in the portfolio. She laid them on the coffee table. There were graphs. There was a one-page summary from the brokerage firm she'd mentioned, estimating the business value at $2.4 million. There was a proposal for something she called a family management transition, a structure in which a new LLC would be formed, with her and Cody as co-managers, and I would become a senior advisor. She said that phrase like it was an honor. I looked at the papers. I looked at her. I looked at my son, who was looking at the floor. I said, "Serena, how long have you been working on this?" She said, "We've just been trying to be proactive, Owen. We care about you." I said, "I know you do." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "I need to tell you both something." They both looked at me. I said, "The business you're looking at in those documents, Callaway Self-Storage, 4 locations, the valuation your broker put together, that entity no longer exists in the form you're describing." Serena's expression didn't change right away. She was good at controlling her face. I said, 2 months ago, I completed a restructuring with my attorney. The operating assets of the business are now held by 2 separate LLCs. I am not the sole owner of either. I entered into a partnership agreement with a silent partner, my brother Lawrence, which means any transfer of ownership or management change would require his consent, which he has already told me, in writing, that he will not give under any circumstances. The room was very quiet. I said, "The valuation your broker completed was based on the old ownership structure which no longer applies. You'd need to start the whole process over. You'd need Lawrence's consent to go forward with anything, and I can tell you right now, he is not going to give it." Serena set down the paper she was holding. Cody looked up at me for the first time since we'd sat down. I said, "I'm not angry. I want you both to know that. But I built this business over 31 years. I built it with your mother, Cody. It is not something I am going to hand over because someone prepared a nice binder. I looked at my son when I said that, not at Serena, at Cody. He looked back at me and something shifted in his face. I have known his face for 36 years. I saw him when he was an hour old. I know the difference between his expressions, even the ones he tries to hide. What I saw in that moment was not defiance. It was something closer to shame. Serena gathered her papers. She said she understood, that she hadn't realized the situation had changed, that she'd need to speak to their attorney. She said it professionally. She stood up, shook my hand, an actual handshake, not a hug this time, and walked to the front door. She waited there while Cody stood up slowly from the couch. He didn't follow her right away. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at the framed photo of his mother on the side table. The one from their anniversary, 1999. Diane is laughing in it. She's always laughing in my favorite photos of her. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad, just those 3 words. He didn't explain them or expand on them. I think he was hoping I would fill the silence again. This time, I did. I said, "I know, son." He nodded. He walked to the door. I said, "Call me Sunday like you always do." He looked back at me. He said, "Yeah, I will." And he did. That Sunday and every Sunday since, Serena is not usually on those calls. We don't talk about that afternoon. We talk about football and the weather and how the diner on Salem Avenue changed their menu, which neither of us thinks was a good idea. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And some things you don't give away just because someone draws up a document and calls it a plan. I still do my quarterly walkthroughs. Last month, I drove out to the first location, the one I built in 1993, the year Cody started kindergarten. It's been expanded twice since then. 30 units became 60. The office has a new roof. Phil painted the roll-up doors last fall. A dark green that I wasn't sure about at first and that I now think looks exactly right. I warped the property by myself, the way I used to when everything was new and every unit felt like an accomplishment. I checked the locks on the empty units, looked at the gutters, made a note about a crack in the asphalt near the east row that needs to be sealed before winter. Then I sat in my truck for a few minutes before driving home. I thought about Diane. I thought about the morning we signed the papers on that first piece of land. She wore her red coat, the wool one she got at a consignment shop and wore for 15 years. I thought about Lawrence, who has never once asked for anything in return for being my brother. I thought about Cody. I am not naive enough to think that one afternoon in my living room fixed everything between us. Marriages are complicated. People are complicated. Serena is not going anywhere, and I don't expect her to. What I expect is that my son, over time, will remember who he is, where he comes from, what his mother would have said. I think he's already started to remember. I can hear it in his voice on Sunday mornings. The storage units are still mine. All 4 locations. All 218 units. Laura's is on the paperwork, bless him, but he'd sign his share back to me the moment I asked. We both know that. It was never really about him. It was about making sure the people who wanted something that wasn't theirs understood, clearly and without drama, that they were not going to get it. I stayed quiet at the wedding. I'm glad I did. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently, and honestly, not much. Not because I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. There were moments I said less than I should have to my son, moments I let distance build where a phone call might have helped. But the core of it, staying quiet at that wedding, not handing over information to someone who had already shown me how she would use it. That part I'd do the same way every time. Here's what I've come to understand, and I'm not speaking from a book or a sermon. I'm speaking from 31 years of building something with my own hands and nearly losing it to a spreadsheet someone else made about my life. What I understand is this: the choices you make quietly, privately, without applause, are the ones that actually protect you. Not the dramatic confrontations, not the ultimatums, the quiet ones. Serena was smart. I want to be honest about that. She researched the market. She brought printed materials. She timed everything, the phone calls, the visit, the letter from the law firm, in a way that showed genuine calculation. She was not some cartoon villain. She was a person who saw something she wanted and moved toward it methodically. That kind of person doesn't respond to anger. They respond to walls. So I built walls before she ever arrived at my door, and I built them quietly, and when she got there, all she found was a structure she couldn't enter. That required two things. I think people underestimate. The first is paying attention early. When Serena swept her eyes across my living room that first night, most people would have told themselves they were imagining it, that they were being uncharitable, that family is family, and you give people the benefit of the doubt. I gave her attention instead. I watched. I remembered, and when the pattern confirmed itself, I was already moving. The second thing is having the patience to not react. When Cody sat across from me at that kitchen table with his yellow legal pad, everything in me wanted to say the thing that would end the conversation permanently. I didn't. I said enough and no more. Because I knew that reacting, getting loud, getting emotional, making it a fight, would only have given Serena something to work with. Emotion is leverage for people like her. Stillness is not. Cody is my son. I love him in the way you can only love someone you've known since they were an hour old, someone who has your mother's eyes and learned to ride a bike in your driveway. That love is not conditional. But love and wisdom are not the same thing, and for a while he confused the two. He thought that because I loved him, I would hand over what his mother and I built. That is not what love requires. Love required me to hold firm so that someday he'd understand what it means to build something that lasts. I think he's getting there. I can hear it on Sunday mornings. What you protect quietly, you keep. What you defend with patience, you pass on whole. That's all I know for certain.